Hello, this is international football commentator Derek Ray, and you're listening to the Ranks FC podcast.
Hello Ranks Squad and welcome to Champions League Takeaway here on Ranks FC. This is your look at Wednesday's action from the first leg of the round of 16 ties. 4 games tonight. The early game by Leverkusen holding Arsenal to a 1-1 draw. And then the later games, we saw Real Madrid crush Manchester City 3-0 at the Bernabeu. PSG come from a strange first half to win 5-2 at the death against Chelsea. And another absolute masterclass from Bodo Glimt as they dismantled Sporting 3-0 in the Arctic Circle. My name is Jack Collins and I'll be your host today. And joining me across the water is the one and only Mr. Dean Jones. How you doing, mate?
Yeah, I'm okay, mate. English football in the mud again. I might need counselling after all of this because I'm a big EPL advocate, mate. I waved the flag. I waved the flag. And our teams are getting pastings everywhere they go. England get battered everywhere they go, don't they? Yeah. I don't know what the expectations were of Man City in terms of progressing past Real Madrid, given history, etc., given the state of their own season and their ups and downs. But I don't think they would have expected this, mate. I don't think so.
I don't think any of us were expecting this thing. It's a weird one. Obviously, covering Real Madrid in relative detail on the podcast, across our Patreon, we look at this team. And for the last couple of weeks, there has just been a sense of everything sort of falling apart around Real Madrid. That, you know, the kind of early initial moments of Alvaro Arbeloa's reign had given way to these strange performances. We obviously saw the loss to Osasuna. We saw the 1-0 loss to Getafe that took them off top spot in La Liga. They needed a very, very late goal from Fede Valverde to win against Celta Vigo at the weekend. And it was that man that came up clutch again tonight. Now, I suppose you could look at this in two ways, right? Was this a Manchester City collapse or was this a Real Madrid masterclass? I think probably a little bit of both. But what I saw from Real Madrid tonight was a real hark back to the Real Madrid that we saw a couple of seasons ago in the Champions League. And perhaps the fact that there was no Jude Bellingham, there was no Kylian Mbappe, meant that this was ultimately an incredibly hard-working Real Madrid unit that utilised the superstars within their ranks to open up opportunities, and they took them with aplomb. And, you know, there's this kind of level being like, Real Madrid maybe weren't underdogs coming into this game, but at the very least, you were looking at it and saying, oh, okay, Man City, especially with the second leg at the Etihad, probably slight favourites to go through. And I think Real Madrid, weirdly, for a team that are, you know, not the reigning, but the kind of kings of this competition, who have won it more than anybody else, who have this Galactico status, have players that almost relish that role. And I think that when we saw them kind of in some of the Champions League winning campaigns, they were campaigns where people had almost written Real Madrid off. And look, I'm privy to this, you're privy to this, we've all done it this season. I think watching them in La Liga regularly, you're looking at a team and saying, how are this team going to even challenge to win the Champions League? You watched them against Benfica in the second leg of that game, and they were torn apart at times by that Benfica side, who, you know, are quite far off the pace when it comes to the Portuguese Primeira. And you were watching them just fall apart defensively. And suddenly they come in and they put together this performance, and just almost inexplicable in so many different ways. But Champions League nights, Bernabeu, sometimes it just hits different. And tonight felt like one of those.
Yeah, I mean, I guess so. I mean, I did see one City account the day before the game saying missing Madrid players, Mbappe, Rodrigo, Asensio, Bellingham, Militao, etc. Said this could be our easiest tie against Real Madrid in years. That didn't age well. Didn't age well at all. They started to look like Tottenham by the time we got to half-time, and Fede Valverde had scored a 42-minute hat-trick, an absolute sensational performance from him in terms of the style of his finishing. Like, every goal was just, it was just so impressive. And the different the different tools he's got when it comes to being in and around the 18-yard box is quite unbelievable. And I have to say, the way that he finished it off with a hat-trick, I absolutely loved it. But City,
Absurd.
It was absurd, wasn't it? That's a good word to sum up the way he brings it down and finishes it. City, it was a really interesting game as it opened up, and City looked like they would be ready to go toe-to-toe with them. Doku looked like he'd be a danger.
That's the weird thing. City started quite well.
They did start well, yeah. But then Madrid just have this X factor that is difficult to match. And obviously, Route 1 football, if you like, can be very effective. And Thibaut Courtois is very smart. He can spot things very quickly, and he can set you off on the front foot very quickly. And when you combine that with Valverde's pace and guile and poise, you've got a very dangerous combination. Often, people spend so much time talking about Vinicius or Bellingham and Mbappe if they're there. And Valverde still seems to kind of drift into the background and is never a player that's highlighted as much when you're building towards kickoff. But yeah, got a hat-trick by half-time and the game's dead. Could have been worse, mate. Straight after half-time, Donnarumma has to make a good save. Then Real Madrid get a penalty, 55 minutes, something around there. And Kushnerov gives the ball away quite sloppily with the poor pass into Rodri, I think it was. Again, a more direct ball straight through the middle. Vinny takes it around Donnarumma, takes him down, gets a yellow card, but a really poor penalty from Vinicius, and a moment when he could have put the entire tie to bed. At that moment, you're thinking, look, if Real Madrid concede here, if City can get one goal back, then the second leg really does come to life in a much more interesting manner. But it just didn't really feel like City's night. There was a moment about 20 minutes from time when Rudiger takes one off the toe of Haaland. The ball's pinged across the 6-yard box. Haaland's there waiting for his bread and butter finish, and Rudiger just toes it away and then celebrates, like properly celebrates with his hand in the air, like jumping up and down like a small child. He's a big child. He's a big man. Rudiger's a monster. And it was a big moment in this tie for him as well. They were celebrating again when Courtois made a save 15 minutes from time, when Nico O'Reilly looked to have nicked the ball off of Thiago and put it into the net, but Courtois, those long legs, keeping him at bay, and Real Madrid hold on. They take a 3-0 lead to the Etihad, and it's going to be very hard for City, I think, to turn that around. And the Madrid mentality machine is back.
Yeah, I mean, I was looking at a variety of different accounts over the course of this game, kind of getting the feel for it from both City fans and Real Madrid fans. But I think my favourite tweet came from Tom Allnut, who's one of the writers at the Times. He said, has anyone ever scored a Champions League hat-trick and in the same game made more tackles than any other player on the pitch? Valverde is an absolute machine.
Highly unlikely, isn't it?
I think it probably is highly unlikely.
You know what, though? I have to say, just before I forget this, like the third goal, the way that he's like, the way he made those strides into the box and then finished it was very Steven Gerrard. It was like, I was like, what does that remind me of? I was like, oh, that's Steven Gerrard, actually.
I mean, the little touch over Mark Gay, he sends him back to Crystal Palace.
Unbelievable.
It's absolutely absurd. I've said it before, I'll say it again. Like, it's just one of those finishes. But what I thought was really impressive from a Real Madrid perspective, and look, we'll come on to City and that aspect of it, but from a Real Madrid perspective, just the buy-in, right? Like, how often have we criticized this team for not being together, for not being a unit, for struggling to kind of tie all the composite parts together? And instead today, we see a team that are completely and utterly moving as one. That for me is the difference. And look, credit to Arbeloa here, because not only does he make a pretty big gamble, not really starting with a striker, he leaves Gonzalo Garcia on the bench, who's been someone he's kind of leaned on a little bit in recent weeks. He also leaves Camavinga out, and we've talked about that Tchouaméni-Camavinga pivot being a big thing. And instead, he brings in Thiago Pitak. And the way that he went about his business, yes, obviously he loses the ball for the Nico O'Reilly chance, but he's a really, really interesting player, Thiago Pitak. And when you're watching him play, I said this before, at times he feels almost Barcelona coded. The little give and goes, the way that he kind of shifts the ball around, that graceful elegance on the ball. I really, really enjoy watching him play football. And I thought he put in a real come-of-age performance tonight. He's been someone who's been fast-tracked into the first team. I think they brought him in from Leganes a couple of years ago. And he's been a shining light in the youth teams. Obviously, someone that Arbeloa knows well from his time with the youngsters. But to bring him in on a night like this in the Champions League, when you're leaving the likes of Camavinga on the bench, is a big, big statement. And it's paid off for him in a massive, massive way because he had a really good game. And what it did was it opened up that space for Valverde to gallop into. And ultimately, he's the match winner. But, I mean, Fede Valverde, we've sung his praises so much on this podcast down the years. But just another one of those performances that shows why he's wearing that armband, why he is the kind of heart and soul of this football club. And whilst all of the noise comes around Vinicius and Kylian Mbappe and some of the kind of big names that lead the line, it really is Valverde's team. And if they could play like this more often, which was kind of, it felt like a microcosm, the performance of Fede Valverde. Everyone bought into that kind of concept. That, I think, for me is the thing that you look at and go, wow, they've really, really done that. He finishes the game, obviously, kind of doubling up at right back and winning free kicks for his team in the corner to see it out. That work rate, that work ethic, that blue collar kind of style of football that he plays is so integral to if Real Madrid are going to be a team that moves forward, that does find that balance between superstar attackers and everybody else on the pitch. It needs more and more players who are willing to kind of buy into it in the way that Fede Valverde does.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah, like he's awesome. He's absolutely awesome. We know he's capable of scoring great goals and more than one goal a game, but this is just this was something special to have the captain's armband on, to score a hat trick, to do it in the Champions League. He doesn't score that many goals in the Champions League. You know, we know that he can crop up with moments, but we don't expect him to do this. Far from it. In fact, and in that sort of style. But even though that's the case, it doesn't totally surprise you when he's there doing it, because he's just capable of so much, whether it's his unbelievable passing, whether it's tracking back, whether it's rattling people in tackles, or whether it's his finishing. He's just an all-round brilliant footballer. And this is the thing. This is the thing when it comes to Real Madrid in the Champions League. Superstar performances are common, and usually we'd expect this to be Vinny, but it's not. They're still okay.
Yeah, 100%. No Mbappe. Vinicius not having, his best night. I thought it was fine generally, but obviously the missed penalty is going to kind of take the headlines in some ways. It was really
poor, but yeah.
But it was very much Valverde's night, and he deserved it. And I actually think, wearing the 8 on his back, captain's armband, as you say, some of those runs into the box, the physicality and the technique. I can see why you pulled that Gerrard comparison out earlier on. It really was one of those performances where he kind of put the rest of the team on his back. It's something we're used to seeing from Steven Gerrard. I think it's interesting from a City perspective. And look, there's a lot of City accounts that are very angry tonight with how it's all gone and with the performance that their team has put in. They were saying that, basically Pep outdone all over the pitch in terms of what it looked like. But I'm really kind of struggling with, is this just one of those things where he gets it wrong? Obviously, he brings in Kusanov to right back, and effectively what happened there was that Real Madrid just didn't really attack down that wing. And then at left back, you bring in Nico O'Reilly to try and deal with that kind of physicality that Valverde can provide down that side, and he struggles with it. And ultimately, City will look at this as one of the worst performances. And I know what you said earlier about, I wonder what the expectation is in terms of them in this competition. But actually, I kind of felt like City might well be better suited to do well in the Cups this season. They can kind of turn on and off those performances. You look at Erling Haaland, his goal record in 2026 is absolutely awful. And yes, okay, we're holding him to an incredibly high bar because that's the bar he's set himself. But actually, if you look at that, it kind of felt for a while like City had an inevitability about them in terms of scoring goals because of what he was putting together. But, it's 4 goals in, I think, 15 games for Erling Haaland in 2026. And that sense of inevitability about him getting on the end of things, it just seems to have dissipated.
Yeah, I'll tell you what, mate, there's an unbelievable spell coming up for Pep Guardiola now. there is a danger of his reputation being slightly tarnished depending on how things unravel this season, and obviously whether he decides to go in the summer or to give it another year. But he's got West Ham away at the weekend in a game that Man City need to win to stay in the title race. Then they've got the second leg of this to come in the Champions League. And then 22nd of March, you've got that Carabao Cup final. So that's what his next 10 days looks like. You then got the break, and then they've got Liverpool at home in the FA Cup. And straight after that, they've got Chelsea and Arsenal to come in the Premier League. Like, this is a defining moment for Manchester City. And a lot of the time, when these questions are asked for Guardiola these days, he actually doesn't have the answers. And I've defended him to the hills. And I remember about 15 months ago, one of my friends saying to me, look, mate, his time is up. He's getting found out time and time again. Like, I think you need to reassess the way you look at him. And I was very stubborn about it. I can remember the conversation so clearly because he was making some good points at the time. And I was like, nah. And ever since that day, I have started to question him a little bit. And this next period of 6-7 games is going to be extremely interesting.
Yeah, you can make mistakes, right? I think he made a mistake with the starting lineup today. I think he tinkered with it too much, and there was too much kind of, how do we nullify Real Madrid rather than how do we get at this Real Madrid side who have looked fragile at times in recent weeks. And I think it probably comes down to that. Maybe it's, the old overthinking conversation coming back into the fore. But look, they have an opportunity to potentially turn this round. I can't really see it based on the performance that they put in tonight, but not over, I'd say, but very, very, very heavily now in favour of Real Madrid. Let's come on to the PSG-Chelsea tie, because this one goes back to a Premier League side's home ground as well. Chelsea will host PSG next week on Tuesday. They will do so trying to overturn a 5-2 deficit. And what was weird about this game, Dean, is that it wasn't a 5-2 game by any stretch of the imagination. PSG started really, really well, and Chelsea stood off them. And you look at the opening goal that the Bradley Barcola scores, there had been chances before that. The defending is so incredibly slack, and Chelsea just had absolutely no intensity for the first 10 minutes of this game. But the goal seemed to wake them up. And from there, they went up the other end and they scored an excellent equaliser, brilliant switch pass to Malo Gusto. There was a question about the defending. It felt like Nuno Mendes kind of went screaming over to the other side of the pitch to win a tackle and just didn't get back over. And no one dropped in to that area. João Neves normally is the man that kind of drops into that space when one of the fullbacks goes vacating, but he didn't. And Gusto had all of the time and space, the freedom of the Parc des Princes, in order to actually stick this one into the back of the net. He likes scoring against PSG. He did it, I think, a couple of times when he was at Lyon, and he came up kind of directly up against his former Lyon compatriot in Bradley Barcola tonight. But it was a good finish, and suddenly it was sort of game on. And at that moment, you're kind of wondering where this goes. Chelsea have a big chance to take the lead. Comes to Cole Palmer in the box. It's a good save from Safonov, who seems to have kind of taken over the number one duties for the time being at PSG. Chevalier just a little bit all over the place and hasn't convinced in his debut season. But from the save, the ball gets nicked out to Desiree Doué, who skips away from Trevor Chalobah, who's stepped up to press him in the middle of the park. And he slides this wonderful ball through for Ousmane Dembele. Dembele kind of drifts into the box. He's got Fofana for company, and Cucurella is getting back as well. And he's got options to his left, but instead of using them, and I think last season's Dembele just lays the ball on a plate. Instead of that, he ties Wesley Fofana in a pretzel and just sticks it in the far corner. And I think it's 14 seconds from the Safonov save to the ball being in the back of Chelsea's net. It's a lightning counter. And just as Chelsea had kind of dragged themselves into the game, and it had been relatively even picking since Gusto had equalised. I thought Chelsea had the better of it just before they found that equaliser. They get stung by this. So you're wondering how Chelsea are going to come out in the second half, but they came out really well. And they found a relatively deserved equaliser, I thought, just before the hour mark. It's really nice play from Pedro Neto, steams down that left-hand side for Chelsea, and he picks out Enzo Fernandez with a lovely cutback, who just places it into the top corner. And Enzo had been guilty early on in the game of kind of screaming a few over the bar. We've seen that from him before, where he gets the opportunity to shoot when he's a little bit further out than he is here, and he just balloons them. But this is really controlled. again, it's Nuno Mendes. And look, I love Nuno Mendes to pieces, right? Like I had him in my Ballon d'Or conversations. I think he is the best left back in the world. But he tries this weird switch ball to Hakimi, which just doesn't work. And it gets picked out by a Chelsea player. Pedro is released down that left, Pedro Neto, and he pulls it back for the equaliser. And at that point, it's a bit of a strange game. There are chances at both ends, but nothing particularly clear cut. And you're wondering, is it going to be a moment of magic or a complete head loss that ends up deciding this game? Well, it's a bit of both, but the first thing that comes is the head loss. And we've seen some weird goalkeeping moments this week. We obviously saw what happened with Kinski in the Chelsea game. We also saw Oblak give the ball away in that game and make a mistake. We saw it happen in the game between Real Madrid and Manchester City at both ends, I thought. Courtois slightly liable for the one that Pitak miscontrols, which he redeems himself with a wonderful save. And Donnarumma with some slightly dodgy passing as well. But Jørgensen, who was preferred in net to Robert Sanchez, I think basically because of his ability to play the ball on the deck, definitely not his ability to save things. We'll come to that in a minute. Just passes the ball straight down the throat of a PSG player. A lot of these passes into his defensive line or building out from the back. There's 4 players closing down. It's just one of those get rid of the ball moments. And instead he tries to play the clever pass. They get pickpocketed and it drops to Vitinha on the edge of the box with the Chelsea defense scrambling. And it's just this glorious lob over the keeper, just so nonchalant. He just lets it kind of fly and it drifts into the back of the net. And you're thinking, wow, Chelsea had worked so hard to get back into this game. And it's been undone by a moment of madness in the back line. Now, Jørgensen had been threatening to do this kind of thing all game. There had been a couple of loose passes. There had been a couple of moments that were a bit hairy when he raced out of his goal, and he ultimately ended up doing okay with them. But it was just that kind of underlying sense that one of these might go wrong at any given moment. And actually, if you watched Liam Rosenior's Strasbourg side, especially in that game against Crystal Palace that they had in the Conference League. They ended up winning the game, but Mike Penders was playing the most risky goalkeeper role I think I've ever seen. He was picking the ball up 25, 30 yards outside of his box and effectively playing as an extra defender. And to be honest, if Palace had been more clinical, they would have punished him for it a number of times. Well, Jørgensen is punished for it here. And then they get undone and the game kind of twists on a couple of moments of real quality. Kvaratskhelia comes off the bench to replace Desire Doué and he picks the ball up on the left-hand side, jinks inside and just curls one into the far corner. You can already picture the goal, right? Like when I say it, it's a lovely, lovely finish. And then there's this kind of moment of another weird head loss right at the end. Chelsea have decided they're going to try and get that extra goal, make it 4-3, be a very interesting second leg, which is totally fair enough. Rosenior gambles a little bit to try and get himself back into the tie in some regard. And the ball boy goes to throw the ball away from Pedro Neto. Pedro Neto pushes him into an advertising hoarding, which he then topples backwards over. It starts this bit of a brawl. Everyone's getting involved. I'm not really sure how Pedro Neto got away with it, if I'm honest. He seemed, he apologized to the ball boy at the time. This isn't Eden Hazard on Charlie Morgan. Right, like it wasn't as bad as that, and he was just trying to get the ball back. But equally, you can't be throwing ball boys over advertising hoardings as far as I'm concerned. It's not a great look, and it starts this bit of a brawl on the pitch. When the ball goes back into play, PSG play this gorgeous flowing move down the right-hand side. There's a lovely little flick into the path of Achraf Hakimi, who tucks it back inside into the box, and Kvaratskhelia is there again to side foot. He doesn't make a clean connection, but all Jørgensen can do is push the ball into the corner of the net. And it's one of those you just wonder, would Robert Sanchez have saved that? And I think the answer is probably yes. So it was a big call from Rosenior in terms of bringing him in. I think it's a call that's backfired.
Yeah, I mean, obviously I haven't seen the game. I'm not as good as watching 3 games at a time as you are. So I haven't seen this one properly yet. But obviously the big narrative coming into it, which Rosenior himself was asked about, was like, are you going to actually assert some authority here? The Club World Cup was one thing, you won it, but is it a real reflection of you being world champions or whatever? Like PSG have still been regarded as a better football team. I think most of us know that they are a better football team. I mean, this result is pretty overwhelmingly proof that Chelsea have got some way to go, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, they've shot themselves in the foot here. And I think the Rosenior has kind of made an issue for his own back in some ways, because he now has one goalkeeper who comes into a massive Champions League game and makes a massive error that turns the flow of the game.
What are they doing with these goalkeeper things?
In the biggest game of his life. And they also now have another goalkeeper in Robert Sanchez, who's surely doubting himself after being dropped for two of the biggest games of Chelsea's season, after mostly having a pretty good campaign up to this point. So, yeah, I'm struggling with it a little bit. I think that, Rosenior has done generally quite a good job since he's gone into Chelsea. I've been mostly impressed with what he's put together. It's not been perfect, but I think he's kind of handled it better than a lot of people expected him to. But I do think he's made an issue for himself here, and I'm not sure how Chelsea are going to solve this between now and the end of the season. And look, this kind of, I think what we see here is a Chelsea side who've gone toe-to-toe for most of the game with the reigning champions. Now, PSG aren't quite what they were. They still feel like there are moments where they play some of the most scintillating football in Europe. But I saw a tweet from Peter Rutzer, who's a good friend of mine. He said, PSG still have the quality, but it's a bit like someone's turned down the dimmer switch on their intensity. Not quite as precise, a few more errors in their play than last year. Fatigue feels an obvious talking point, but it was always going to be hard to match last year's standards anyway. And I think that's probably it. They have these kind of spells, the first 10 minutes, and we saw this against Newcastle as well, right? The first 10 minutes, they are electric. They race out of the gates. They're playing incredible football, and they take the lead in both of those games. But once they take the lead, suddenly it becomes a bit sloppier. Somehow it just feels like they're more gettable at. And, I'm in a group chat with a couple of my Chelsea mates, and they were like, oh, this could be embarrassing. I was like, weather the storm, grow into it, and see how you go. And then Chelsea equalised, and you're like, there you go. That's the moment. And I think that over the course of this, there's some shifty defending from a Chelsea perspective. There's also some really clinical finishing from this PSG attack, which we know is obviously world class. I still think that PSG look vulnerable in terms of some of the games that they play. Obviously, we saw them lose to Monaco at the weekend, sure. But this wasn't a performance that probably merited the scoreline that they've got. Now, they've taken advantage of the situations they've been given, and that's completely fair enough. But I don't think watching it felt like a 3-goal advantage. Like, if you're looking at the other 3-goal advantages now, we'll obviously talk about Bodo Glimt Sporting in a little while, but also the Man City versus Real Madrid game. You're looking at that and saying, yeah, that's a pretty fair reflection of what happened in this game. I don't think this 3-goal advantage feels as clear-cut, for me at the very least, as what we saw in the other games. And so it's still quite hard to get a handle on PSG. Equally, we saw them kind of start to go through the gears in the knockout stages last year, and maybe they're doing that again. But I still think that there's a lot more to go from PSG and an absolute heap more from Chelsea if they're going to get to the sharp end of this competition.
Yeah, absolutely. As I said, English football in the mud. The good news is we still got one more English team to talk about after the break, Jack, and they didn't lose by 3 goals. Didn't go ideally, but they didn't lose by 3 goals.
Yeah, it's something to cling on to, right? We're going to talk about that Arsenal game at Leverkusen and, of course, Bodo Glimt's massive win over Sporting when we come back after the break. Stick with us. Welcome back to Champions League Takeaway here on Ranks FC. Jack Collins and Dean Jones alongside you. And we're going to come on to the game that took place in Leverkusen. Now, a lot of people were expecting Arsenal to go to Leverkusen and win. They've been pretty much impeccable across the cup competitions this season so far. They're 100% record in the Champions League. That did end tonight at the Bay Arena, Dean. But Arsenal found themselves level late on in this one. What did you make of it?
Look, obviously there's the narrative to be had. We've seen Eze do it against Tottenham, the team he was supposed to joins Arsenal, kills them off. Kai Havertz goes back to Bayer Leverkusen and he scores the goal which keeps Arsenal on level terms going into the second leg. Obviously, Andrich had given Leverkusen the lead in this one from a corner. It was a bit of an Arsenal goal in itself, a header at the far post. But ultimately, the narrative and the headline that's everywhere is around Havertz. So that's the top line. Havertz saves Arsenal. My issue really is that, yes, we expected them to win here, but I think that's the problem. I felt like coming into this game, there was a sense of them potentially underestimating the task ahead of them, and maybe they weren't motivated enough for the task ahead of them. They had Mansfield at the weekend, which they obviously got through by a single goal, but it's taken a goal in the second half to kind of decide that one. And then this one too, on paper, even as fans, it's hard to get yourself up for. In a moment when you've had like that big Tottenham win, you had the Chelsea win recently, you've got the Carabao Cup final coming up. That
feels weird to me though, Dean. This is the Champions League. Arsenal are the one seed in a competition they've never won.
It's not that. It's just I think this particular fixture, I just felt, I don't know, I just had a feeling from it that like it just felt flat. So as I was seeing it, I'm like, it just feels like there's an expectation that they win a game like this, or that at least it's fine and they get the job done at the Emirates. And to be fair, they probably still will. Because of this, the fact that they've got out of there alive means that they probably still will. But it just felt a bit flat. And look, maybe that's what happens when you're competing on four fronts. They're back to domestic action at the weekend against Everton in a home game in the Premier League that they've got to go and win to maintain and continue to have that authority and that clearance at the top before they then go into the second leg 3 days later for this one. And then 5 days after that, they've got the Carabao Cup final. So again, like this is the business end of the season. There's a reason that it's called that. And Arsenal have to show that they can churn out the results week after week after week. And there are a few poor performances here. You know, Saka's going to be highlighted most clearly because he gets dragged midway through the second half. But Eze wasn't great. Jurrien Timber wasn't great. Martinelli wasn't great. I felt it ran quite deep on the night. And ultimately, the lack of intensity only really changed once Madueke came into the game. I've said a couple of times across this podcast this season that Madueke gives you something that Saka just isn't giving you anymore. Saka, yes, is the better player, but Madueke, because he has a point to prove, I think, will sometimes, when he gets his chance, just go at people. And he's
super direct in a way that Saka isn't.
Saka doesn't do that at the moment. He used to do it a bit more, but he doesn't really do that at the moment. And
I think it's that Noni Madueke is very, very comfortable going on the outside of a player, whereas Saka really isn't. He comes inside a lot, like that's his kind of trademark, and that's fine. The combinations aren't as slick as they were in years gone by, but he doesn't tend to go on the outside of his man quite as much. And I think Madueke does, and that probably does give Arsenal a slightly different dynamic, especially in a game where the opposition are kind of covering the bases. The back five helps them in order to kind of string that along the back line and keep you in those wide areas. They're not defending the width of their box there. They're defending entirely across the pitch. I think it gives you something different. And obviously it provides the kind of breakthrough that Arsenal need to find that equaliser.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's it, isn't it? Like, he forces a tackle to be made. And look, is it a bit of a soft pen? Yeah, probably, because the contact isn't massive, but ultimately when you're making
there's contact there, you're going down. Like
there's a bit of contact. It's a lunge. It's kind of from behind. As soon as you're making a challenge like that, you're taking a risk. And as soon as he's knocked, Madueke's going down. Of course he is. And Arsenal get their big moment and they get the penalty. And Havertz just about squeezes it home. And gets his big moment. And as I say, Arsenal get out. A draw is probably a fair result. I mean, I thought Leverkusen were good, and I liked the fact that they gave Gabriel and Saliba a real test in this game. They were made to work for their big money tonight, those two, in a way that quite often you don't see them tested. They definitely know that they've been in a game as they make their way back to London at the moment. And fair play to Leverkusen for that, because they did play Arsenal, say, at their own games in terms of the set pieces. They will feel that there were times in this game they definitely had the momentum whereby they could have swung the game in their favour even more effectively. But ultimately, they will know that they've given Arsenal's backline a test, and there's not too many teams that can say that this season.
Yeah, I thought that Christian Cafano was absolutely unbelievable up
Yeah,
top. And he's going through a good spell at the moment. He's obviously keeping Patrick Schick out of the team. He's returned from injury, but
He's
can't
only
kind of
19.
displace him.
19.
He's very, very talented. It's still quite raw, but like very, very talented. And I'm excited to see how he develops. It was a pretty bold lineup, I thought, from Kasper Hjulmand. Playing Ernest Poco as a right wing back felt like a bit of a risk when you know that Martinelli's coming at you down that side. I thought Jarrell Quansah had another really, really good game at right centre back, filling in that hole. You know that Grimaldo is going to be there on the left and he's going to cause problems. He gave Timber a really good run around as well. I thought that Leverkusen were good value at the very least for a draw. Yeah, and look, you can point to the fact that Martinelli smacks the bar in the first half for Arsenal, and they didn't create loads more. And that was one of the kind of opportunities where Leverkusen had kind of thrown themselves forward, and Arsenal were able to break it. It's good work from Saka, actually, that take it inside and allow the kind of run down the flank that gets the ball over. It's left by Eza. Gyökeres feeds Martinelli, and he smacks it off the bar. But when you're kind of looking at the way that the game played out, I thought that Leverkusen probably created the more chances. And look, I've no idea if the stats back that up. But from the eye test and just kind of watching it, it felt like Leverkusen had kind of come with a game plan that they executed pretty well. And I thought that, the kickoff routine to start the second half, obviously they score from the corner that follows it, but they could have scored from that moment. A really good header.
I like the fact they put pressure straight on them, by the way, from that kickoff. Like that was
stuff.
Neat. Yeah.
I really enjoyed that. It was a really neat little set play, a neat little trick play. And I also enjoyed that Kasper Hjulmand had a little laugh and a joke with Nicolas Jover after they scored from a corner to basically be like, we beat you at your own game, which was fun as well. But, the fair play to Kai Havertz, actually. The stones on that to come on, and he'd obviously got like an ovation when he came back onto the pitch. He never really got to say goodbye properly when he left Leverkusen. He was there for a decade because it happened in COVID, his transfer to Chelsea. And then to kind of step up and take that penalty in the way that he didn't celebrate afterwards, but it was, I think from a personal level, from a professional level, that takes quite a lot of guts. And there's a lot of players on that pitch. I know that Saka was off the pitch and he's kind of the usual penalty taker, and Gyökeres can take them as well. But there was players on that pitch who could have stepped up to take the penalty. He took the responsibility on himself in what must have been quite an emotional evening for him. And ultimately started at home and got Arsenal the draw. They will go back to the Emirates and fancy themselves. But Leverkusen this season have a very, very good defensive record at home in the Bundesliga. And whilst they haven't been great at set pieces, they found a way to kind of break through here using them. I was impressed with their performance. They've been a bit up and down this season. Obviously, the start of the season was pure chaos. Hjulmand's come in and kind of steadied the ship a little bit, but the results have still been a little bit all over the place in terms of how they've played. And I thought they gave a very, very good account of themselves tonight.
Yeah, absolutely. And, they'll go to the Emirates and think, right, this is it. It's treat it like a cup final. Certainly, it's a knockout cup tie now for Arsenal as well. As to
They've
be
got
honest,
nothing to lose there, I don't think, and I think that might free them up to play some good
at a time
football.
when Arsenal have everything to lose. Every game Arsenal have from now to the end of the season, they basically have everything to lose, and that's something that I think Leverkusen should try and lean into next week.
Maybe less so in the Champions League. I know I made the point earlier, but I think that most Arsenal fans, if you said to them, all right, you go out the Champions League at this stage, but you end up winning the Premier League title, they'd probably shake your hand on it right now. So we'll see. We'll see how it goes. All right, let's finish things off with the game between Bodo Glimt and Sporting. It was the game that I was looking forward to the most tonight, and you can call me a sicko if you want, but it really was. I was really excited to see how these two matched up. Obviously, it's Bodo side on such an incredible fairy tale run, but also I thought the Sporting and them finishing in the top 8 of the league stage was one of the great stories that got overlooked of that. And you know what? I wasn't really sure what to expect. I kind of assumed that whilst Bodo Glimt have been on this incredible, and the way that they've played football during this run, where they've obviously beaten Manchester City, they've gone to Atletico Madrid, they've beaten Inter over 2 legs and beaten them in both legs. I wondered if the fact that this was Sporting and obviously slightly less of a, major name in European football. And I say that with, all the love in the world. You know how much I love the Primeira, and you know how much I love the Portuguese Big Three and their kind of place within the football ecosphere. It did feel like the kind of one where we often talk about this like in the FA Cup, right? If you get a tie and you're like, oh, okay, we've just had Macclesfield beating Crystal Palace, the holders of the cup, and then they get Brentford at home. And you're like, you're just going out in that tie because it's not big enough a scalp almost to kind of get everyone up for it in the same kind of way.
Mm-hmm.
I wondered if this was going to happen to Bodo Glimt. Absolutely no chance. They scorched the life out of Sporting. And some of the play here, I tweeted in the middle of this game, Dean, just saying it is a joke how good Bodo Glimt are and what they're putting together here. As I said, the interchanges, the movement, the third man runs, they're an absolute delight to watch in pretty much every way. And I'm a bit obsessed with them. And that really is the way I feel it. You look at the way that this side's set up. They, take the lead from the penalty spot after a foul from Vagianidis, who's the kind of young right back in this Sporting side, who didn't have a great game, if we're honest. But you kind of look at this and you're thinking, okay, how's this one going to crack open? They had opportunities before this, a couple of big opportunities. And Koi Silva in the goal had made a couple of big saves already. And you're thinking, okay, is it going to be one of those nights? They take the lead. Sandra Fett steps up from the penalty spot, gives him absolutely no chance. And then they go 2-0 up on the stroke of half time. Some lovely play by Jens Petter Hauge on the edge of the box. And he slips it through for Blomberg, who makes no mistake once he's put it through. They get a little bit lucky with the way the ball ricochets, but no concerns at all about the finish. It's a wonderful finish. And just as you think at 2-0, they're just starting to maybe settle down a bit, be like, okay, this is a scoreline we could take away. They find a goal from a completely different way. They play this incredible switch ball over to Jens Petter Hauge. He beats his man and then slides it into the middle, and Hock is there in the middle to tuck it away, score his 5th goal of the campaign just before he's substituted. And suddenly that 3-0 lead looks pretty steady going to Sporting. We've obviously seen them go to Inter and kind of find ways to pick Inter off in a different kind of capacity to the way that they won at home. And if you're Sporting, I think you are genuinely very, very worried about this, because we've now seen Bodo be able to take this form from their hometown and take it around Europe in some of the biggest coliseums and the most incredible stadiums on the continent. I wonder at the Alvalade if we don't see something very, very similar to the way that Bodo played against Inter. It was another complete performance. And just the movement about it. I was having a conversation with a Sporting friend of mine, and he basically was like, the way that they move is dizzying. And I was like, who knew that Kjetil Knutsen was the kind of second coming of Rinus Michels? Because this feels like total football in its purest form. And the way that this front three interchange, the way that Sondre Fett moves forward, the way Evian covers ground, is incredible. Just what they're doing here. And again, this is a team who have basically played no competitive football bar the Champions League for the last couple of months. I think they're back in cup action now in Norway. It's just begun and we're just getting to the start of the season. But another really, really complete performance. And actually, if you look at it, the way that Sporting kind of found their opportunities, there really wasn't much for Heiken to do in the goal. Like, it just felt like he had a relatively easy night. There's a couple of scuffed opportunities for Luis Suarez, who worked incredibly hard and who is, a wonderful footballer and has had an incredible goal-scoring season in his own right. But in terms of clear-cut chances, very, very few and far between. It was another comprehensive, complete performance from a Bodo Glimt side who are just continue to be the storyline of this entire tournament.
They do, mate. And there comes a point where you have to say, can they win it? I mean, they've got 1 foot now in the quarterfinals. Who do they get in the next round? Is it?
It would be Arsenal or Leverkusen.
Arsenal. Honestly, again, you talk about having nothing to lose. Arsenal fans would be like, we're not losing to Bodo Glimt. We're not getting. You actually might, because this is a proper team. And one thing I said about Arsenal all season that I think has given them the edge in the Premier League and that I think will help them win the Premier League is that they have a team mentality. And I do believe that. But again, it comes that sense of underestimating and all this sort of stuff. Obviously, the likelihood of them winning this tournament is slim. But
you shouldn't underestimate a side that are ever making the quarterfinals of the Champions League, I don't think.
Because the style in which that they've performed in the last... What's the record now of the last 3? This is the 4th big result, the 4th big opponent that they've done.
Fifth. Well, 4th big opponent, but 5th big result. Yeah,
4th big opponent, 5th big result. At this point, you just go for it, and they have such a belief in their playing style. that why not? Like 3-0 at home to Sporting is a brilliant result. Fair play to
If
them.
they did come up against Arsenal, it would be very interesting in terms of two very divergent styles. And I like matchups of different styles. I think that would be very, very interesting. And, I think they're already pretty much neutrals favourites at this point. But if they were coming up against this Arsenal side, I think a lot of people would want to buy into the philosophy that they could pass their way through it. And the little interchanges
100%.
and the little kind of passages of play where they just knock the ball around in these beautiful little triangles. Like, a lot of people will want to see that succeed for a variety of different reasons. Obviously, some people just want to see Arsenal fail, and that's the nature of football fandom. That's fine. But I think in terms of the stylistic nature of it, a lot of people will look at this and watch this game and watch the way that they've played. I'm sure I was one of about 4,000 people watching this one on the TNT Sports app compared to kind of everybody else who was tuned into the big ones. But it was a real exhibition of just wonderful football. And they've been doing that for a number of games now.
Absolutely.
They just are a really, really good side. And I am, as I said, a little bit obsessed with them.
Yeah, and look, we say Arsenal. It might be Bayer Leverkusen. Arsenal are far from there at this stage. Bodo are closer to progressing than Arsenal. That much is for sure.
I think that's less of a stylistic clash, if I'm honest. Yeah. Obviously, if it's Kasper Hjulman, there'll be an interesting.
I'd tell you what, that'd be great though, wouldn't it? Well, that'd be great if we get a quarterfinal between those two as well. We will have to wait and see, mate. But what a brilliant couple of days of games.
Yeah, it has been a lot of fun, and we've got some very, very interesting second legs teed up for next week. But I think that's where we're going to call it a day, Dean. So all that's left for me to do is say thank you very much to you, Mr. Dean Jones.
Cheers, mate.
I've been Jack Collins. This has been Champions League Takeaway here on Ranks FC. I hope that you've enjoyed these 2 days of content. The truth will be coming out on Friday, where the boys are discussing most improved players across this season. So make sure you're locked in for that one. But for me and from Dean, thank you so much for listening. We'll see you all very shortly, Rank Squad. Take it easy. Peace.